In the silent dance between desire and power, there exists a truth so profound that it has remained hidden in plain sight for centuries. What if I told you that the greatest minds in psychology, from young to modern neuroscientists, have uncovered the exact mechanism that triggers unstoppable devotion? Not through words or actions, but through presence alone. This isn't about manipulation, it's about mastering the language of energy, understanding the invisible dynamics that shape how others feel, respond, and attach. The Stoics called it logos, that silent force within that, when aligned, can move people without lifting a finger. There's a reason why some individuals walk into a room and instantly command respect without ever opening their mouth. It's not confidence, it's not charisma, it's something deeper. A kind of unshakable internal clarity that speaks directly to the hidden ego of everyone around them. They don't chase connection, they attract it. And it's not luck. It's a discipline, a mindset, a way of being that speaks louder than any words ever could stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just psychological, it's transformational. It will show you how to communicate directly with someone's ego, not through flattery or force, but through a subtle power that the Stoics understood. Centuries ago, a power built not on reaction, but on stillness. If these conversations speak to something real in you, something grounded in truth, philosophy, and inner growth, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it helps us reach more minds like yours, and it quietly signals that you're walking this path with intention. Do you know why rejection hurts so much? It's not because we're denied something we wanted. It's because we're denied the feeling of being valuable in someone else's eyes, that sting you feel in the chest when someone brushes you off or doesn't return your effort. It isn't about logic, it's not your rational brain doing the talking. It's your ego, the part of you that craves recognition, that aches to be seen and understood. And when that part feels invisible, it doesn't just sulk, it suffers. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But that tragedy echoes far beyond families. It touches every relationship where someone's true self is not seen, not acknowledged. The ego doesn't want approval. It wants meaning. It wants to feel like it matters in the eyes of others, that its existence carries weight. So when someone ignores you, it's not just a social slight, it's an identity wound. It's the ego whispering in the background. You're not enough for them to notice, and yet if rejection slices through the ego like a blade, what heals it? It's not flattery that only coats the surface, not praise. Either, because praise without truth feels empty, what actually heals is reflection. Not in the mirror, but in the eyes of someone who sees what you could be, what you haven't even fully realized in yourself. Aristotle taught that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. But sometimes you need someone else to hold the mirror steady before you even begin to look. Think about it when someone tells you that you're good. It feels nice, but when someone says, "I see more in you than you're showing," something stirs, a quiet fire lights up in the soul. That moment doesn't just validate, it challenges, and in that challenge the ego begins to shift. Not because it's been coddled, but because it's been awakened. This is where influence begins, not through loud speeches or constant explanations, but through presence, through energy, through the subtle tension between who someone believes they are and who you silently reflect. They could become. Plato wrote, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark." The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light, and sometimes all it takes to awaken that light is a look, a calm silence, an unshaken presence that says, "You are more than this and I can see it." That's not manipulation. It's clarity, and clarity, when paired with restraint, has a gravity of its own. People don't gravitate toward those who chase them with words. They're drawn to those who hold their center, who don't need to shout to be felt. That's how you speak to someone's ego without saying a word. It's in how you carry yourself when someone tries to test you. It's in the silence you allow instead of over-explaining. It's in the moment you choose not to react because you don't need to prove anything. Socrates believed that The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing, and in that humility, that internal stillness. There's immense power because when you don't try to dominate a conversation, you give others the space to meet themselves. And that's when their ego starts listening. It listens when it feels subtly challenged, not attacked, but invited to rise. It listens when it senses mystery, not games, but grounded mystery. The kind that doesn't offer everything up front, the kind that lets someone feel the pull of curiosity again in a world addicted to instant validation. Your refusal to over-disclose becomes sacred, your boundaries become signals, and your presence becomes the message. So the next time someone pulls away or underestimates you, ask yourself, what are you reflecting? Are you mirroring back your own need for approval? Or are you calmly holding space, showing that you are already full, already whole? That silent assurance, it speaks louder than any defense. The ego doesn't respond to noise. It responds to weight not heavy in emotion, but heavy in meaning. When you stand in your truth, when you look at someone and see not what they are, but what they're hiding from you. Speak to the oldest part of their soul, the part that just wants to be seen and shaped, not praised for standing still. So what does it look like to speak to the ego without words? It's subtle, quiet, almost invisible to anyone. Not paying attention, but those who feel it. Feel it deeply. Picture yourself walking into a room, you don't speak. You don't force a smile, you're not trying to prove anything. Yet something in the atmosphere shifts, the air feels heavier, but not in a burdensome way. More like gravity, not because of status or appearance or charm, but because you carry yourself like someone who needs nothing from anyone in that room, and in a world full of people trying to be like. That kind of presence feels like thunder and silence. Carl Jung once said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and when you walk into a space, anchored in your own self, unshaken by approval, untouched by performance, you become a living embodiment of that truth. You don't mirror back what others want to see, you reflect back something more uncomfortable and more real. Their own gaps, their unresolved desires, the places they've settled. You don't point it out. You don't judge it, you simply are. And that's enough to make people look inward. This isn't about intimidation. It's not about dominance or superiority. It's about showing up so completely in your own reality that others feel the weight of their own fragmentation. Plato once noted that the measure of a man is what he does with power, but real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to declare itself. Real power is presence, and presence doesn't. Shout, it resonates quietly, consistently, unapologetically when someone stands in front of you, and they can't tell whether you admire them, need them, or feel indifferent to them. Something inside them stirs. That something is ego. It starts to search, to wonder, to grasp for meaning in the silence, and that. Grasping that's influence not because you told them what to think or feel, but because you made them feel themselves more clearly. The most magnetic people are often the ones who leave space for others to project, but not out of manipulation. Out of stillness, they let others reveal themselves not by prompting, but by simply being. And that's the paradox. You speak to the ego, not by filling the silence, but by letting it stretch. Because in that space, people hear things they usually avoid: their own self-doubt, their craving for validation, their unspoken need to prove. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living, and when you refuse to play the usual social games, you hold up a kind of mirror that forces others to examine themselves. If only for a moment. They may not like what they see, but they won't forget it, and they won't forget you, not because you dazzled them, but because your energy called something out of them they weren't ready to face. That's the secret of speaking to someone's ego without a word. It's not about technique, it's about the truth you carry if you're centered, grounded, and unattached to outcomes. People feel it, and the ego, which thrives on comparison, competition, and performance, suddenly finds itself out of balance, not in crisis, but in curiosity. And in that curiosity, you've already started the transformation. You didn't push them. You didn't demand anything, you just made them aware. And awareness is the first step toward anything meaningful. That's influence in its purest form. Not control, but awakening, and the most powerful part, you never had to say a thing. Consider this for a moment. There are people you meet, rare ones, who never ask for explanations. Yet something about them makes you want to explain yourself anyway. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of a strange pull to be fully seen, to be understood beyond the surface. They don't flatter, they don't demand your attention. They just hold a kind of quiet standard that makes you want to rise to meet it, and without saying a word, they speak directly to your ego. That's not manipulation, that's sacred tension. The unspoken space between who you are and who you know you could be. When someone holds that space without trying to close it, it does something to you. It nudges your ego in the most unexpected way, not by soothing it with compliments, but by silently suggesting that you're still unfinished. Carl Jung once said your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart, who looks outside. Dreams, who looks inside, awakes. And these kinds of people, without knowing it, help you look inward. Whether you're ready to or not, the most powerful communicators, the ones who leave an imprint. Long after the conversation ends, don't try to make you feel comfortable. They make you feel challenged. In the best way, they awaken something in you that was asleep, not by pointing out what's wrong with you, but by letting you feel in their presence what's missing. The ego is fragile, yes, but it's also hungry. It craves recognition, but more than that, it craves meaning. And when someone silently reflects your potential back to you, your ego doesn't feel attacked. It feels seen, even stirred. Plato once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act, but a habit, and the ones who truly speak to your ego without speaking at all. They make you want to build that habit of excellence, not for their approval, but to align with the version of yourself you glimpse in their presence. That's the difference between temporary motivation and lasting transformation. There's a big gap between someone who tells you you're doing great and someone who simply looks at you with a knowing kind of stillness. A look that quietly says you're capable of more. The first boosts your mood. The second shifts your identity, because deep down we all know where we're holding back, where we're playing small, and when someone sees beyond that without trying to fix it. The ego doesn't shrink, it stretches. That's the magic of sacred tension. It doesn't push it, doesn't pull, it holds. And in that holding, you start to rise, not to impress, but to become. Socrates believed that the secret of change is to focus all your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new, and in the presence of someone who doesn't hand you easy praise. You begin to sense what the new might be. You feel called to step into something more. Not because they asked you to, but because their silence made the noise inside you louder. That's what it means to speak to someone's ego without saying a word. Not by filling the silence with compliments, but by using that silence to mirror potential. And in that mirror, transformation begins not with words, but with awareness. But where? Does this power really come from the ability to influence someone without speaking, to awaken their ego? Just by existing in a certain way. It doesn't start with strategies or tactics. It starts with how you see yourself, because before you can ever reflect anything meaningful to someone else, you have to first confront the reflection in your own mirror. You have to ask whether the person staring back is still performing for approval or standing fully in their own truth. If you're still bending your voice to be liked, still shaping your behavior to avoid discomfort, still waiting for someone else to validate your worth, then the energy you carry isn't clear, and when your energy isn't clear, it doesn't challenge anything. The kind of presence that stirs people at their core isn't rooted in a need to please. It's built from a place that doesn't need to be chosen to feel complete. The ego, both yours and theirs, doesn't respond to submission. It doesn't respond to flattery either. It responds to presence, something most people don't even realize they're lacking until they feel it in someone else. And presence isn't loud. It's not a performance. It's a quiet strength that doesn't shrink in the face of judgment and doesn't expand for applause. It just is. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And yet when you do, When you stop negotiating your value in every room you enter, you start carrying a different weight. Not a heaviness, but a kind of gravity. The people around you feel it even if they can't explain it. It makes them pause. It makes them reflect, and more than anything, it makes them aware of where they've let parts of themselves go. Dim, this is where your silent influence begins, not from superiority, but from alignment. When you walk into a room, already full, not with noise, not with ego, but with inner steadiness. Other egos start to notice, not because you demanded attention, but because your stillness exposes their turbulence. The parts of them that crave approval start to wonder why you don't. The parts that rely on validation begin to question your freedom from it. That's what true self-possession does. It speaks for you before you speak, and it creates attention. Not the uncomfortable kind that pushes people away, but the sacred kind that invites people to rise to meet you where you are to earn access to the space. You don't give out freely, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're honoring yourself. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and the deeper your self-knowledge. The less you seek your reflection in other people's opinions, you stop needing to be seen to feel real, and ironically, that's when people start to see you more clearly than ever. So when someone's ego begins to stir in your presence, when they start explaining themselves more, trying harder, leaning in without knowing why, it's not because you said something clever. It's because you didn't flinch, you didn't need anything. And that silence, that centeredness touched something in them that wasn't fully awake. That's the quiet power that changes people, and it starts always with how deeply you've chosen to belong to yourself. So let's explore how this actually shows up in real life, because it's one thing to understand the concept of silent influence, but another to live it. This is where your nonverbal cues do all the talking. Every movement, every pause, every breath. It either reinforces your inner stability or reveals your need for validation. And people feel that even if they don't realize they're feeling it. Start with the eyes. They're not just windows to the soul. They're mirrors of your self-possession when your gaze is steady, not intense but relaxed and grounded. It signals something important, that you're present. You're not seeking approval. You're not trying to measure someone's reaction to you. In real time, you're simply observing, comfortable with what you see and not afraid to be seen yourself. On the other hand, eyes that dark glance down or look past someone suggest inner noise, a lack of clarity, and the ego in front of you picks up on that. Then there's the silence. Most people rush to fill every quiet moment because silence feels awkward, vulnerable. But when you become someone who lets silence breathe, you communicate power, not dominance, presence. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something." When you're okay with letting words land and letting pauses stretch, you show that you're not performing, you're allowing the moment to settle, and that's rare now. Think about your boundaries. Not the ones you talk about, the ones you live. Do you give your time and attention freely to anyone who asks, or do people sense that your presence has to be earned? Not through games or manipulation, but because you carry yourself like someone whose attention is intentional. When your presence feels sacred to you, others will treat it that way too. These simple silent signals speak directly to the ego of the person in front of you. Because their ego is scanning constantly, it's looking for cues, it's silently asking, do I impress you? Do I matter to you? Should I try harder? Am I being seen or just watched? And here's where everything shifts, when your body language calmly says, "I see you, but I don't need anything from you." Something inside them reacts, not with offense, not with fear, but with curiosity. And that curiosity becomes your leverage, not to control, but to guide the interaction. On a deeper level, when someone's ego becomes curious, when it feels gently unsettled, it becomes open. That's when you can connect not with their mask, but with what's behind it. Socrates reminded us that the shortest and surest way to live with honor in the world is to be in reality what we appear to be. When you live that truth, when who you are inside matches how you show up outside, your presence becomes magnetic, not because you chased attention, but because your stillness offered something most people don't know: how to hold honesty. This is the art of speaking to someone's ego without ever raising your voice. It's not in how loudly you declare your worth, it's in how clearly you live it quietly, consistently, without apology. And that kind of quiet speaks volumes, but influence without intention becomes manipulation. That's the line too many people cross without realizing it. Power without purpose always slides toward control. So before you lean into this quiet ability to impact others, ask yourself, what exactly are you trying to awaken? Not in them and yourself. In the space between you both, because this isn't about creating obsession. It's not about pulling strings, making someone chase you, or getting them hooked on your energy. That's shallow, that's short-lived. What we're really talking about here is evolution inner movement, the kind of presence that stirs someone's potential and calls it forward. Not with pressure, but with quiet recognition, and that kind of communication doesn't come from needing to be admired. It comes from the deeper desire to see people become more of who they are, whether it benefits you or not. Plato once wrote, the highest form of knowledge is empathy. But empathy doesn't mean giving someone everything, it means holding space for what they can become. And sometimes that space requires discipline, the restraint to not over-explain your worth, the restraint to not overgive just to be liked, the restraint to let silence speak when words would only dilute the message, because silence has its own kind of language. And often the most powerful message you can send is not "I believe in you," but "I believe thee in you, and I'm not going to prove it for you." That's not cold, that's clarity, and to the right person, that's life-changing. Carl Jung said, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. And real wisdom in human relationships comes from knowing when to step forward and when to step back." Most people think love or respect or trust is proven by how much you do. But sometimes the deepest respect is shown by what you don't do. You don't rush to fix. You don't rescue someone from the discomfort that might actually change them. You don't hand them an answer when they've barely begun to ask the right question. You simply hold your ground firm, compassionate, clear. There's a message in that posture. It says, I see who you are, but I also see who you're not yet. And that reflection is rare. Most people either flatter what they see or reject what they don't. But when you can stand in the middle, seeing both the light and the shadow without needing to change, either you become something powerful, a mirror that doesn't distort. And in that reflection, people begin to rise, not because you told them to, but because something inside them remembers what it feels like to grow. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. When your presence calls people toward excellence without ever demanding it. That's not manipulation. That's mentorship. That's maturity, because restraint isn't about being distant or mysterious for effect. It's about trusting that not everything needs to be said, that sometimes the space you leave between your words is the very place someone else finds their voice. And when you learn to offer that kind of space, not for silence, but for self-realization, you're no longer influencing someone for your benefit. You're influencing them toward their own expansion, in that. In its truest form is sacred. Let me tell you something most people never hear. The ego isn't evil, it's wounded. It's been shaped by every moment we weren't enough, by every time we were overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel small. And when you learn to speak to it, not by feeding it with praise or crushing it with criticism, but by respecting it, everything shifts. You stop being someone who either pleases or provokes you. Become someone who activates, someone who doesn't just speak to the surface, but wakes something up in people they've forgotten. Was even there, and when? That part of them. The ego feels stirred in your presence. It creates a subtle tension. Not a conflict, but a charge. You become hard to forget. Not because of your words, not because of anything you did, but because you quietly represented something they haven't stepped into yet. That's the difference between noise and impact. One fades the moment you walk away. The other lingers in their thoughts, echoing days later in silence. Still, it's fair to wonder, won't this make people uncomfortable? Yes. It will, and it should, because no one grows when everything feels safe and familiar. Real change begins at the edge of discomfort. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." and when your presence pushes against someone's ego, just enough to make them feel unsettled. It's not cruelty, it's an invitation. An invitation to expand. The people who grow the most from being around you will often be the ones who feel something. Shift the moment you enter the room. Not fear, not jealousy, just a sacred kind of discomfort like their ego. Suddenly realizing it's not being entertained, but confronted not in anger, but in truth. That's the essence of power. Not dominance, not volume, but gravity. A quiet weight that doesn't bend to be liked or reshape itself for approval. That's why some people stay in your mind long after they're gone. It wasn't what they said. It was what they stirred. They spoke to a deeper part of you without even needing to speak. In that kind of presence, it leaves a mark. But here's the paradox. Most people miss the more you try to manufacture this kind of presence, the more it slips away because it can't be forced, it can't be faked. Real presence doesn't come from effort, it comes from alignment. Plato wrote the first and best victory is to conquer yourself, and that's where it begins, not with a performance, but with self-mastery. When you stop chasing acknowledgement. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you begin to build a foundation inside yourself that can't be shaken. It happens quietly, slowly, in moments. No one else sees, but that's where the real work lives, when you finally look at yourself without distortion or demand and realize that your value was never something you had to earn. It simply is. Only from that place can you reflect back into the world. Something that others feel as power, a grounded presence, and ironically, to speak to someone else's ego. You have to silence your own need to be heard, because it's in that inner stillness that real impact begins. So how do you start this shift? Not by analyzing others, not by reading more signals or studying more tactics. You begin by turning your attention inward. Start watching the small ways you give your power away. The moments when you laugh at something that didn't deserve it, when you agree to something you didn't feel aligned with, when you explain yourself too much hoping they'll understand, when really silence would have spoken more clearly. Every time you choose presence over performance, you train something inside you. You create a new rhythm, a new energy, one that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't try to impress. It simply is. And in a world full of noise, that kind of stillness becomes unforgettable, because the truth is, people don't remember those who demand attention. They remember those who shift the atmosphere. Those who speak to their ego not by challenging it with words, but by carrying a presence that invites it to rise. That's how you shape reality. Quietly, steadily, without saying a word. The most powerful voice in the room is often the one that doesn't speak, but still shifts everything. When you carry that kind of presence, you don't just walk through the world. You change it quietly, completely. If today's message stirred something in you, stay with that feeling and take it deeper by watching one of the videos waiting for you on screen. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, where stillness becomes strength and insight becomes action. Until next time, stay grounded, stay true, and let your silence speak.